Welcome back to our channel. An HOA in Florida has decided that instead of looking at an abandoned golf course, maybe the residents of this community could start looking at some new houses where the golf course used to be. No wonder they're upset. But hey, if you can't afford to keep up the golf course, they're going to do something with that valuable Florida land. On today's video, we're going to go over a lot of analytical information from the CDC that's going to help us understand why the future of Florida looks so grim. What is the origin of Florida's homeless problem? Are golf course communities really going to start getting turned into apartment complexes because people are not able to afford the HOA fees anymore? There's currently an HOA golf course in Florida that's abandoned, and the developers are considering putting in more houses where the golf course was because people living in that community can no longer afford to keep their golf courses running. You guys remember a while back I made a video talking about golf courses in Florida and how golf courses were detrimental to the future of the state, and how most likely in the future, as golf course communities failed and the aging members of the HOAs cannot afford the fees to keep up the golf courses, those golf courses would fail, and it would inevitably end with golf courses being rezoned into higher density, more affordable housing for a not so aging population, which is now the fastest growing group in Florida. It used to be that only old people would move to Florida to retire, but younger people are starting to move to Florida at an increasingly higher rate. These younger people moving to the state of Florida have above average incomes, but the people that are moving out of Florida, in particular young people, have below state average incomes. A huge percentage of Florida's urban landscape has been devoted to nothing but pure golf courses. In places like Naples, Florida, it has led to extraordinarily high HOA fees, and it has reduced the available amount of land for new development. However, just like I told you guys in that video, in the future of Florida, golf courses will be rezoned and redeveloped into higher density housing or other types of urban developments. And this is already happening in Citrus County, Florida. As I mentioned in my original video, a lot of people were laughing at me saying it was impossible, it was ridiculous. But again, Jose was once again right, because it's already taking place in Citrus County, Florida, in the Pine Ridge community, where they're considering, hey, here's this huge piece of land that we own. You guys can't afford the HOAs. You guys can't afford to keep this golf course running. Fine, perfect. Let's just build a bunch of apartments, and instead of looking at a golf course, you can look at a bunch of young millennials moving into apartments. The cost of living in Florida has become abnormally expensive. The government is in bed with insurance companies, and it's allowing them to jack up their rates as much as they want and include new regulations and requirements that are going to make the general home ownership process much more expensive, as home maintenance, insurance, and other costs of living in Florida are mounting. Many people who retired in Florida affordably, like it's the case of places like Citrus County, are going to find that soon they as a community as a whole are no longer finding themselves able to afford to keep up these extensive HOA fees to keep things like their golf courses open. Sure, back in 2015 and previously, you could buy a home in Citrus County very affordably, but now they're finding that the upkeep, the maintenance, the HOA, the insurance, just the general cost of home ownership is increasing in the state of Florida, and now as a community, nobody is able to afford to have a golf course in their backyard. So what are we going to do with these obsolete pieces of land that just happen to take up chunks of real estate that are worth more than the houses they were previously intended for as amenities? What's going to happen is that the people that own these developments, that own these HOAs, are going to try to find a way that they can exclude those home ownerships from the HOA costs related to the golf course. They are still going to have to pay an HOA for the general maintenance of the community, but since they can't afford to keep up with the golf course, they're going to build higher density. They're going to build houses and apartments, new houses and apartments, because nobody wants these old, raggedy, outdated, almost uninsurable properties from the 80s and 90s, people want to buy new houses when they move to Florida, especially now as insurance, hurricanes, other natural disasters means that new properties are easier to insure. They're much safer assets to have, whereas outdated properties have become more of a liability, especially now there's a huge labor shortage. Especially true in a county like Pasco or Citrus, where you have an aging population, but you don't have too many young people willing to work. Take the current city of Bradenton, Florida, where I currently live. A house from the 50s or 60s in a decent neighborhood will run about $400,000. You can run to the other side of the metropolitan area, and in Northport, you can buy for less than that a brand new, bigger home in a safer neighborhood that has much more potential for appreciation than a decrepit older neighborhood in an area like Bradenton, where homelessness is rampant. You're closer to the water, you're below sea level now. It's becoming more increasingly dangerous to have these properties, so they're a bigger liability. The property that you bought 10, 20 years ago in Florida and back then was a good investment. Back then saw potential for appreciation. Today has become a massive liability. The crazy part is that this Pine Ridge community in Citrus County, for its day, was ahead of its time with larger square footage in these homes, natural landscapes. Those communities mirror what these new communities look like, which means, in theory, a community that was ahead of its time is today rushing ever quickly to its demise, despite the fact that it was exactly what the buyers of the future wanted. Because of the affordability of this particular area, they were able to build bigger homes, bigger square footage, which is exactly what we're seeing today. You're seeing homes being built bigger than ever, on lots bigger than ever. You would think this is exactly what the buyers of the future would have wanted. However, turns out that the complete opposite is true. Keep in mind, Citrus County has a high elevation. This particular region of the county doesn't really have flood concerns, doesn't have wildfire concerns, doesn't get hit directly by hurricanes. It seems like the perfect place for things to go in the right direction. But however, in the background, a lot of things have been going wrong. Florida has been catering to the elderly for a long time, and it's starting to backfire. In a lot of ways, Florida's starting to realize that these places like Citrus County, where everybody's gray-haired, if you look at the photos of the news reports on Fox News, you'll see that just about everybody that was sitting in that room complaining about what their future development plans were for that golf course happen to be people of gray hair, people in advanced age. While that is the demographic that Florida caters to, it's also horrible for business. Now that prices are increasing, in order to stay in the state of Florida, to move to the state of Florida, you're going to need people with high incomes. Most likely, that's not going to be somebody who's retiring affordably. The increasing cost of living means that people are no longer able to retire in Florida in the same fashion they did in the past. And most likely it's going to be younger people with higher incomes. And clearly that is not good for business. Take the case of Miami and Naples, Florida. The southern tip of the state had 4 years of absolutely no real estate appreciation because prior to 2016, there were as many people dying in Southwest Florida from advanced age as there were actually people moving here to buy homes, which means that somebody would buy a home in Naples, Florida, and that home wouldn't appreciate because there were so many people that were dying that there would always be a revolving door of inventory. Inventory that was most likely part of an inheritance, and the people that were obtaining the inheritance needed to distribute that money as soon as possible, and they were not interested in getting the top dollar for that real estate. They just wanted somebody to make a cash offer to make the property disappear. A scenario that is not unfolding right now, especially with higher interest rates. It really doesn't make sense for somebody to have a mortgage right now if it's extensively expensive and if homeownership costs increase. At least from that perspective, you're not going to start to see inventory flood the market continually like you did in the past for the same reasons. Now, Florida still continues to be a transient state, especially if it's attracting a younger crowd of people, which it is, believe it or not. So despite the state of Florida accommodating the needs of the elderly, they're starting to find out that it's really not good for business, and their endless desire to continue building in the state of Florida, it is actually more profitable to cater to a younger crowd. Even if it is transient, at least that transient crowd doesn't end up with a guaranteed flow of inventory like the previous scenario did, which is what has kept real estate prices flat in South Florida right up until 2016, and what has undoubtedly led to this region of Florida, north of Tampa, to always have a steady flow of inventory. After all, gray-headed people are eventually not going to be there, which means that their homes that they're living in will undoubtedly end up on the market. It's also led to another problem. A lot of people only had a single child, which means that instead of a distribution like in the past, a lot of the new generation, instead of selling the houses, are actually moving into these houses. Citrus County, Florida has the highest overdose death rate in Florida at 83 per 100,000. It is quite literally on par with Eastern Kentucky in West Virginia. Now, I've studied extensively this topic on why Citrus County has this problem, and from my understanding, it originates with people retiring affordably. The point comes when those people pass away, their children inherit the properties, they move into those properties, and now they are in Florida with a home paid off, no real sources of income. It's difficult to prove this statement analytically, but it seems logical that people who retire in Florida affordably are also likely to abandon their families somewhere else and come here to live in Florida, having really no desire or care for their family. Analytically, I'm going to show you guys some information of how much the American family structure has suffered, the deterioration of the American family. Let's look at it from analytics so that we can understand exactly why. Why is this particular county in Florida having the highest overdose death rates? Why are people not able to afford their golf course community fees? And why are developers still interested in a piece of land and developing and growing areas that continue to be failures decade after decade? If there is one thing we can definitely establish a clear correlation with, is the fact that the places that today are affordable retirement, tomorrow are going to have massive problems. High overdose death rates, ironically homelessness, despite the fact that these areas are more affordable. We recently did a poll on our channel on what the leading cause of homelessness is in the United States, and a lot of you guys believe that predominantly the housing cost is the reason there's so much homelessness, and that is actually false. Let me explain to you why. Places like Miami and Naples, that are the most expensive cities to live in Florida, don't have the most homelessness. The most homelessness is actually originating in places like North Fort Myers, Brevard County, Pasco County, Hernando County, places that just happen to be the most affordable of the large urban areas. And of course, they are the whitest counties in Florida, or regions of the counties in Florida, areas that originally grew thanks to people retiring to Florida affordably. So we can clearly make the unmistakable correlation between people retiring in Florida affordably and future homelessness, future high overdose death rates, unrelated to places with high real estate prices like Naples, where you simply don't see that homeless problem. So there's an undisputable, clear, unmistakable correlation between affordable retirement and homelessness and high overdose death rates, what is plaguing this region of Florida. But let's dive a little deeper into that topic and learn a little bit more of what leads to this problem. And it's hard when I make a statement that is hard to prove analytically, but let's dive into some of these analytics that are going to shed some light into what I'm saying. Fertility rate by race. Hispanic women out of 1,000 have a fertility rate of 63, while for white women, it is only 54. Now keep in mind, Citrus County, when we look back 10 years, was about 90% white, while South Florida today in some areas is pushing 30 to 40% Hispanic. Now in South Florida, places like North Miami, Hialeah, Naples Park, you're starting to see a decrease in population density, which has actually led to a decrease in population in a few places. But it's not because people are moving out of these areas. It is because at one time these areas had larger families, and now you have less population density by household size. Hispanics have larger family groups, and as these kids grow up, you reduce the population density by reducing the size of the family, which has been happening throughout the United States regardless. Back in 1960, the average American household was 3.3. Today, in 2023, we are down to 2.5. The average Hispanic family, however, consists of 3.8 people. In other words, Hispanic families of 2023 are actually the dream family of the 1950s. The real American dream, what people would say the perfect America of the 1950s, let's say, that is being lived today analytically by Hispanic families. Now, some particular ethnicities and nationalities of Hispanics are actually living at above 4 per household. We're talking Guatemalans, Salvadorians, Mexicans, averaging over 4 per household. To understand clearly, the white population of the United States is every day moving further away from having a strong family, while the Hispanic community is currently having analytics that reflect what many Americans call the dream era of when America, the American dream, was actually alive. Now, for the most part, the Asian community is kind of similar to the white population, with a few exceptions. When you look at people from Asian ethnic backgrounds, Hmong, Burmese, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi are also having families with more than 4 persons. This shift in household sizes has a major impact on the social and well-being of Americans. And where those strong family numbers are not present, that's where you're starting to see higher overdose death rates, homelessness, and many other aspects that are destroying American society. In turn, the share of family households has declined from 85% in 1960 to just 65 in 2017. The source of this information is testhut.com, and we're also getting information directly from the CDC. This trend is one of the leading causes for which we're seeing increase in residential construction and a rising need for housing-related goods and services, such as furniture, various appliances. Basically, you have more people, but you have less families, so you need more individual structures to house those people because they're no longer living together in the same home. Back in the 50s and 60s, you might have 5 or 6 people living in a house as a family together. Today, those people are divorced, and now they need 4 different houses for the same family. So we can see that this breakdown of the American family has actually led to a spike or a demand in single-family home construction. One of the most misunderstood analytical information. The reason we have so much homelessness and so much demand for real estate isn't because there's more people, it's that the people that are here are more divided. That increases the bottom line for every single person. Makes it more profitable for developers, makes it more profitable for anybody offering services, but it makes it much more unaffordable to the average American. Also explains why a vast majority of the homeless population is going to be of the white or American ethnicity and not so much of a Hispanic background. Back in 1960, 44% of the population was married couples with kids. Today in 2017, the number is far below 20%. In that same time period of 1960 to 2017, the share of single parents almost doubled to about 9%. Back in 1960, only 13% of the population was living alone. Today, that number is approaching nearly 30%. In fact, since the year 2001, the number of married couples in the United States has hovered around 59 million, which means that in the last 20 years, we have barely had any actual growth in the number of married couples in the United States, at least not significantly. So you have an idea, between 1960 and 1995, you went from 40 million Americans to 55 million Americans living as married couples. But for about the last 20 or 22 years, that number has been stagnant between 59 to 61 million couples. In fact, there's even been years where there's been a drop in the number of married couples. In the year 2010 compared to 2011, there was actually a drop in the number of married couples in the United States, something completely unheard of. The problem with a place like Citrus County, Florida, is that it's the poster child of everything that's wrong analytically with America. In marriage rates since 1990, currently less than half. In 1990, the marriage rate was at about 10 people per every 1,000. Now it's less than 5. The good thing is that every single year, about 3.6 million new babies are born. For every 36 babies that are born, one person dies from a drug overdose. So the good thing is that there are still more babies being born than people dying from drug overdoses, even though those babies are born to hood rat baby mamas and lazy deadbeat fathers. Those babies are most likely not going to be raised in a married couple household. They're most likely going to be raised by a single parent. In fact, right now, the national birth rate is more than 2 times higher than the marriage rate, even though the family household size is decreasing, which means that today you're seeing a lot more parents that are going to be having kids outside of marriage, single family homes. You get the picture. That really wouldn't be a shocking analytic in 1960s where people had a lot of kids, but it is today where people are increasingly having kids, but they're not getting married. Really, about 40% of kids born today are born to unmarried parents. That's about half the population almost. It's going to be growing up without any family structure. Not surprisingly, states like Maine, West Virginia, where you have a predominantly white population, you have the lowest fertility rates. And it is possible that in some of those communities, when you look at the birth rate versus the mortality rate, you're actually having more people die than you are seeing people born. Completely unnatural process. 6.7% of white mothers are going to smoke during their pregnancy. That is only 1.2% for Hispanic mothers. White mothers are more than 5 times as likely to smoke during pregnancy than Hispanic mothers. This is directly from cdc.government, and it is completely shocking to see these analytics about how white parenting versus Hispanic or black parenting differ. Most people believe that Hispanic and black parents are actually worse, more irresponsible. But when you start to look at these real analytics from the CDC, it's absolutely shocking. And this is all relevant to today's video because I want you guys to understand exactly why these affordable communities that are predominantly white people retiring from up north are failing, having addiction rates that are incredibly high. I mean, Citrus County, for example, being predominantly a white county, is 10 times more likely to see an overdose than Miami, a predominantly Hispanic county. So to understand why there's so much homelessness and why there's so much addiction in Florida and why and exactly how the housing cost comes into play, which is a factor. Housing cost is a factor, but it's not a factor for the reason people think. People see the rising cost of housing, but they don't understand exactly why that demand exists. And the scary thing is that while analytically, these are the demographics that are bringing the addiction, are bringing the homelessness, and bringing all the problems that are currently plaguing Florida, the state of Florida is doing everything it can to scare away and prevent the demographic that's actually making things better from moving into the state, which means that things in Florida are only going to get worse because that's exactly what the state is aiming for. Laws like SB 1718 have actually made it more difficult for people who are elderly to obtain access to medical care because a vast percentage of the people that were here in the state of Florida illegally or married to somebody who was illegal, what I like to call mixed legal status households, were people that were working in the medical field. So in fact, it's actually hurt the people who thought it was going to help. Access to medical care in Florida has become abnormally difficult. You have an aging population. You have less people who would have those jobs because of the state laws that are going through. meaning that if you injure yourself or become ill in the state of Florida, whether you're looking for a nurse's practitioner, a specialist, or any type of care that's medical, most likely you're going to have scheduling delays that are going to be 3 to 4 months out. If you get hurt right now in the state of Florida and you need access to a specialist, most likely the delay will be longer than your recovery period if you did nothing about it. You cannot have a state where everybody is elderly. You have to have a component of youth in your society in order for that society to function normally. But the state of Florida is ever increasing their efforts to deter people with families from coming to the state. Now, few people will ever have the time in the world that I have to study all these analytics and understand the correlation between higher murder rates, higher addiction rates, and higher homelessness rates, and how that relates to the general composition of the population. But if you start to attract elements and demographics to your community that are more likely to contribute to that problem, in the long run, 10, 20 years down the line, you're going to have a problem that doesn't exactly have a solution because it was created 10, 15, 20 years ago. Many people are looking forward to a solution, but they're not looking backwards to see what caused the problem. And in thus, you're doing things today that are actually aggravating the problem exponentially in the future. You gotta love the CDC. They actually break down these analytics by nationality. Central American mothers had the smallest percentage of smoking during pregnancy at less than 0.3%. Among the Hispanic population, Puerto Ricans had the highest percentage with 3.8% of mothers smoking during pregnancy. Out of all the Hispanic nationalities, Mexican mothers were the most obese, with 68% being overweight at pregnancy. Dang it, Mexican women, get on the treadmill. I guess they really are having too many gorditas. Well, at least they weren't freaking smoking during pregnancy like white women. So what we learn from all this information is that white people don't give a crap about their families, don't give a crap about their kids, and no wonder they're all on drugs and homeless. To put it in a nicer light, Americans are more likely to believe in personal responsibility. Each person is responsible for themselves. And while that is a beautiful thing to believe in, family and community ties are also important to have a bright future. And living in these gated Gulf Coast communities in Florida doesn't mean that your future is analytically screwed up, but living in these communities is actually quite a nightmare. Recently in Lakeland, Florida, the Polk County Sheriff's Office related a story about a woman who was poisoning their neighbors' cats and dogs, the beloved pets of family members. In a gated community in Fort Myers, Florida, a man was dead on somebody's front lawn with a baggie that had fent in it. Garage door open, discovering inside the garage that the person had weapons, grenades, and all types of crazy explosives in his garage. He was arrested. Not only did he have a dead person with a baggie of white powder sitting there on his front lawn, he also had a bunch of very dangerous materials in the man's garage. Scary. A gated community in South Fort Myers off of Gladiolas and Bass Road. The last place you would expect these type of things to happening, but they're going on. Both people are white. I mean, it's a gated community in Fort Myers. Of course they're white.
There's just something wrong with white paper, Jose. I don't know what it is, but something ain't quite right.
Alright guys, so to finalize today's video, these gated communities in Florida that have golf courses and places like Naples, Florida, perhaps are going to be able to afford their golf courses. But some of these more affordable communities where you have these golf courses sitting there, nobody's playing on these golf courses, nobody can afford to play on these golf courses anymore, are probably going to turn into apartment complexes in the future.